So when I struggled with binge eating, I was so anxious, I was so afraid to reintroduce the foods I normally binge on. I would call them my trigger foods or my fear foods. So most of the time for me, it would be like cookies, brownies and cakes. And if you've been following my videos, I always use these 3 examples because these are my 3 trigger foods. So if I eat a tiny bite of a cake, then there's no stopping it. I'm just gonna have the whole cake. So in this video, I'm gonna give you 3 tips on how to reintroduce your fear foods once again and reduce food anxiety. And this helped for me, and these are all evidence-based tricks. So number 1 is to reflect, as simple as it sounds, why you had a bad experience with the food. Sure, we had a bad experience, but was it triggered by an allergy? Did you have an allergic reaction to it? Do you eat that food and then it turned into a binge eating episode? Or maybe did you have food poisoning? Because we need to look back at the main reason why we feel anxious around these foods, and then we try to reverse that. So for me, this fear of food essentially came from being triggered by just eating a tiny bite of the food, and it would trigger a binge eating episode. And after journaling and trying to pinpoint where this came from, I realized I was actually, right before bed, I would always scroll through social media, and then I would just see these articles online and these videos online of people saying, don't eat this food is poison, sugar is poison, cakes are killing you, cookies are the worst foods in the world, think about all of these ingredients they're adding in. And then it started to build up this food anxiety in me, and then this started to promote me trying to avoid cookies, cakes and donuts. So have you ever noticed all these documentaries on social media? They all use fear-mongering tactics. They try to scare you and throw in numbers, the climate and animals sometimes, and feel how strong you are if you follow this diet, and these doctors are saying this, it's affecting your cholesterol if you don't do this. It's always using fear-mongering tactics. So documentaries are not evidence-based. They don't have to be evidence-based. You don't have to go through a scientist or a dietitian to promote your diet agenda on these documentaries. So remember, all foods fit. There's no good foods, no bad foods, no sinful, no angelic, no junk foods, no clean foods. All foods exist on a spectrum, not of good and bad, but less nutritious and more nutritious. So let's use these terms, more nutritious, less nutritious. So maybe the more nutritious foods would be like broccoli, kale, salmon, and olive oil, and the less nutritious ones would be like chocolate bars or crisps. They all have nutrition in them. So like chocolate bars, they have some magnesium in them, they have some phytochemicals if they're dark chocolates. If they're crisps, at least they provide some carbohydrates and some energy and some salt. We still need some salt in our body, but not too much. But salmon, on the other hand, has high in omega-3, it's rich in protein, zinc, and many other nutrients. So there's less nutritious and more nutritious foods, not good and bad. So if we have this mindset of good and bad foods, if we eat food that we call bad, then essentially we're going to call ourselves bad. We're going to self-eternalize these feelings. We're going to make our self-esteem very fragile and dependent on what we eat, when it should be dependent on our values. Would you call someone eating cookies over there a bad person? No. So why would it make you a bad person? So the second tip to reintroduce fear foods and reduce the anxiety around these kinds of foods is to introduce them as a dessert. Because oftentimes when you try to eat cookies and it triggers a binge eating episode, it's because we're really hungry. Oftentimes we haven't eaten these cookies for a long time. We feel quite starved. We haven't been eating enough calories. But if we had a main meal, like a lunch that was delicious and filling, then once we introduce the cookie after lunch, like maybe as a dessert, then you're much less likely to overeat on them. You might have a cookie, you might have a couple of cookies, but it won't lead to 3 boxes of cookies. And the more you try to reintroduce these foods as a dessert, then you'll start to feel more comfortable around foods. Remember, fear foods are fearful because we're scared of them, but if we feel safe around them, that we try to confirm these assumptions that they're not gonna trigger a binge eating episode, it's mostly about confirming your assumptions that they won't trigger a binge eating episode, then you will feel less scared around these foods and you start to reintroduce them regularly as part of your regular diet. So let me use an analogy. So let's say you go to the toilet and then you see a big spider, and then you're so scared of going to the toilet again. No matter how intense your urge is to use the toilet, you don't go back there again because you saw a spider one time and you're scared that it might be there again. But all of these fears, they're only assumptions. You haven't gone to the toilet to confirm if the spider's there. And what we need to do is to go there and use the toilet. And it sounds strange, by the way, talking about toilets, but if you go to the toilet more and more, you're trying to confirm that this fear spider is not there. Maybe the spider's gone, and maybe the spider might come up again, maybe it won't, but you never know until you try to confirm your assumptions. The same thing, another analogy, probably less toilet analogy, is if a little Chihuahua dog bites you, then you might be thinking, okay, all dogs are gonna bite me, all dogs are bad, all dogs are evil, but you're only assuming this. So if you try to approach a Labrador or a Golden Retriever and it doesn't bite you, you might feel quite anxious, like, oh, it's still gonna bite me. But the more you try to be exposed to these fears, which is essentially exposure therapy, then you're eliminating any assumptions that you had that these things are scary. So the more you try to reintroduce these fear foods back into your diet as a dessert, then what might be scary once, these cookies, start to transpire into brownies and then cakes, then all of these fear foods that used to be scary will start to feel quite normal and acceptable into your diet. So as a little note, I have a free course on reintroducing fear foods and trigger foods, so check the link in the description below and hop onto that after this video. So the third and final tip on how to reintroduce your fear foods, the best way, is to start with the scariest foods, the most fearful foods first, and then make your way down and then try to reintroduce the less fearful foods. Because oftentimes when you try to reintroduce the least scary foods, let's say something that's not as scary is a little chocolate bar, okay, that's alright, and then you start to build up this anxiety, like, okay, oh, here we go again, I'm gonna jump up to my next scary food, and then you feel a bit more anxious. Even though you conquered it, you feel even more anxious to move up to the next one. So try to start with the most fearful food first. Remember, try to implement these, introducing it as a dessert and trying to be comfortably full, and then try to work your way down, because if you conquer the best, then it'll only get easier from there. It's just like someone trying to give you an ant. Okay, I'm not scared of the ant, and then I'll try to work my way up to the spider. But if you conquer the spider first, holding the spider or the tarantula or whatever it is, you see people carrying spiders online, then anything smaller than a spider is gonna be not as scary because you conquered the scariest thing. So I hope you found these 3 tips really helpful in trying to reintroduce your trigger foods. And once again, check free course in the link in the description below on the Fear Foods Reintroduction course. So this whole video is a little taster of how to reintroduce trigger foods, but the free course talks about emotional eating, trying to eliminate 3 triggers of binge eating, essentially the whole spiel. So check that out, and I'll see you in the next video. Comment below and share with other people your tips on how to reintroduce trigger foods and not feel quite scared and keep them as part of your diet. So I'll see you in the next video.